So welcome everyone to webinar number 6. This is our last webinar in the series, the CEC-DR series on the academic job search. Is it Emily controlling the slides? Go, there we go. So we have your hosts, as usual, are Bree Jimenez from the University of Texas at Arlington, me, Jessica Toss from UT Austin, Sarah Powell from UT Austin, and today we have a special guest host, Emily Solari from the University of Virginia, is going to be sharing most of the session with us today. And we are going to focus on the process of negotiation. So last week we talked about doing your job talk. And so now the question we're going to answer today is, I have an offer, now what do I do? What happens next? So, I already did this, so we can switch to the next slide. So as usual, if you would like to make a contribution to DR, that would be very much appreciated. It will support continuing programming like this. Any donation is appreciated. If you're not yet a member of CEC or DR, we encourage you to join. You have access to these resources, to CEC convention, and other things that DR offers throughout the year. And then I think you should have gotten in the reminder email. You can always access any of these webinars that have been recorded. They're on the DR YouTube channel, which we will post the link to the YouTube channel in the chat as well. Oh, Sarah already posted it, so it's there ready to go. All right, and if you have questions as we're going, you can just put them in the chat. We'll take opportunities to pause throughout, and we'll take some time at the end to answer any final questions as well. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Emily.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll do a little introduction of myself. So I'm a professor at University of Virginia. I've only been here for this is my 3rd year. But I have been through this process multiple times because I had a postdoc at Lehigh University, and then I had my first tenure track job actually at University of Texas at the Health Science Center in Houston. And then I moved from there sort of midway on the way to tenure to University of California, Davis. And I was there for 7 years, and then I moved to UVA. And so I've sort of been through this process at multiple stages. Today, what I'm going to talk about is really sort of looking at the early career and what that looks like as far as negotiations and job offers and all that stuff. But I'm really happy to answer any other questions you might have. And please feel free to put questions in the chat as I go. I'm really happy to stop if stuff I'm saying is not super clear. So I just tend to like I don't know if probably everyone's familiar with the PhD comic stuff, but I think some of us sort of the job market can be discouraging. And I think in particular this year, it's pretty discouraging. So I think for everyone to sort of just keep a positive outlook on this and sort of an open mind to where you might end up, I think is really important. And I also have a lot of secret plans, and like I've been in this game for a while, but sometimes I'm like, I'm just gonna stop this and I'm gonna open a flower store because this isn't worth it anymore. So all of those feelings are really normal. And I think because this process can be frustrating. So just sort of keep that in mind. Sorry, you have a typo here. Sorry about that. So I wonder if this is a conversion thing, but okay. So you had an interview. That is wonderful news. You got an interview, you made through this process. What happens next? One thing I want to say about the interview process, and I'm sure folks have said this before, is that it is exhausting. And one of the reasons it's exhausting is because when you're doing a 2-day interview, sometimes a 3-day interview, it is like you are on every single minute of the day during that time, even like when you're trying to eat food. So it's an exhausting process. And often what happens when you're done and you go home, you're just like, I'm done and I'm overwhelmed. And I think that's really, really a really normal feeling because academic interviews are like extraordinarily long and tiring. They're not like normal interviews. So what are some practical things that you can or should do in the days following an interview? So you've driven home, you've flown home, whatever it is. One of the things that you really should do, if you haven't gone over this before, is write thank you notes. And I think some people forget this, but you should reach out to folks that you met with one-on-one and people on the search committee and write them a thank you note. And this does not need to be long. It can literally be 1 or 2 sentences, but just sort of acknowledging that they spent time with you and thanking them for that. It can be super brief. And then the other thing is sort of take a deep breath, because the academic interviews are long, and often the hiring process takes a long time. This is not something that you it's unlikely you're going to hear back on this right away, and that can be frustrating. And a little more on this. There are times when you never hear a single thing more from a university. You will never hear from them again. This has happened to almost everybody I know. And so what I would say to you is, do not take this personally. This is just a process. This is part of the process for academic job searches. I think it's probably bad form on the part of universities, but also really, really important to know that, especially those of us who are in public institutions, we are bound by particular HR rules. And so, for example, I have chaired multiple searches before, faculty job searches before, and I am allowed to do certain things with candidates that have come in, and I'm not allowed to do certain things. And so often we're not allowed to reach out to folks until months down the road. And so don't take any of it personally. If you never hear from an institution again, don't take it personally. Okay, but if you do happen to hear from them again and you have an offer, what's the next steps? That's really the point of this conversation today. I do want to say that at my old institution at University of California, I taught a 10-week-long course on how to get a job. And the negotiation piece was usually like a 3 or 4 hour deal. So I don't have as much time. So I'm not gonna be able to get into as much of the weeds that I usually do. But I'm gonna try and sort of give you the higher level, like how to sort of think about it strategically, because I think that that's important. Okay, so some general guidance that's important. Institutions will differ on who you're actually negotiating with. So in some institutions, you're going to be negotiating with the chair of a department. In some institutions, you're negotiating with the dean. In some institutions, you're negotiating with an associate dean. And I think that's normal. And sometimes you're negotiating with all three in sort of this weird thing that sort of happens when you get into this process. And all those things are normal. Sometimes when you ask for something, the response may be, well, I'm going to have to ask the provost about that. That's especially if it's around a salary negotiation, because sometimes deans have upper limits of where they can go. And if they want to go above that, they have to consult with someone above them. So all those things are normal. And if you're getting that feedback from a dean or a chair or whoever, that's not something that would be concerning to me. Like that, those are all normal things that happens. The other thing is that they are expecting you to negotiate. Never take the first offer. They are expecting you to negotiate. Now, what I will say is what you can negotiate on differs from institution to institution, and also the different types of institutions, right? So if you're going to a teaching college versus a research institution versus something else, what you can negotiate will differ, but there's usually a few things you can negotiate on. Like one of the things that I know, I'm from California and having worked in California, is that the CSU system, which is separate from the UC system, they really are not going to negotiate with you on salary. They have a system, they know sort of what your salary is going to be the same as every other person coming in that year, and there's very little wiggle room there. But they will negotiate with you on other things. Whereas if you go into a UC system, also in California, they're absolutely going to negotiate with you on salary. So it's important to know that there are institutional differences, because you want to be able to negotiate sort of where's the biggest bang for your buck, basically, for the institution that you're going to. The other thing is it's really okay to ask a lot of questions. And I mean this like when you're having a conversation with the chair, with the dean, with whomever. If you have colleagues that are already in that institution, it's typically okay to also ask them questions about their process and what it sort of looks like. It's okay to talk to other people. This is super important. I think we hide this process too much from each other, especially in early career, and that makes it hard for people to know what to ask for. So talk to the people that you trust. You want to get all the things in writing. This is really, really important. So once you've sort of agreed on some aspect of your negotiation, make sure you get that in writing. And you need to organize yourself. It's your responsibility to organize this process. And I'm going to sort of show you how I do that a little bit later. And this really is a delicate dance back and forth, right? And it can be frustrating. But it's important to remember that if you have a job offer, that institution is really interested in you. They would not be offering you a job if they weren't interested in you. And they want a resolution on this, just like you do, right? So both parties are interested in a resolution that makes sense for both parties.
Hey, Emily, before you
Yeah.
move on, we have a few questions in the chat. So, Catherine asked, how do you know what is negotiable for different universities?
Right. So that's part of the thing is your networking. So you got to talk to folks. If you know people inside, that's one thing. And I'm going to go through sort of how you'll get a feeling like if let's just take salary as the example. If you're trying to negotiate on salary and they say to you, well, we have a policy where everyone comes in here, then you kind of know that that's not a point you can negotiate on. And then you move to the next thing. And I'll sort of talk about that in a little bit. But I think it's really important to talk to folks that you know. Your networks are really important in this process. And if you have trusted colleagues in the institution or someone who's been in that institution before, maybe gone, talk to those people.
I think that's a great response. And Regina asks, can you give examples of other things that can be negotiated other than salary? And I think that's what you're going to talk about now. All right, Regina leads us into that. Thanks, Regina.
So I have a whole lot. So I call these buckets. When I work with my postdocs and my students, these are the buckets. And I think I am really serious about this in my lab. We talk about negotiation a lot. And so different institutions have different buckets they will negotiate on. And these are just some of them. And there's probably some that folks are thinking about that are more. These are sort of like my top, however many this is. And so the first thing is salary. And I'm going to go into each of these things a little bit, not each of them, but the ones I think may be confusing a little bit deeper. Some are salary, startup funds. So these are research funds for you to start your research. Your teaching load is typically negotiable at almost every institution, even the teaching institutions, that's sort of your main job. You can typically negotiate that. Graduate student support. So if it's an institution that has PhD students or master students, you can typically get some money to cover the cost of a graduate student. Your lab space is typically negotiable. Space is a hot button issue at every institution I've ever worked at and probably at every institution around. So sometimes it's hard to get lab space as a junior researcher because sometimes that space is left for more senior folks who have grant funding, but it is something you should talk about. Sometimes in some institutions, I mention this only because in some institutions, the computer technology budget is a separate budget from your startup funds. And that's not true in every institution, but it's like, you should be asking the question, do I get a computer or do I need to is there another bucket of money that I need to talk about for my technology support? So software that you need to run data analysis and your computer and your external monitor, all those things. These things on the bottom are a little bit more for senior people, although not unheard of for junior people. So signing bonus, there are some institutions that will give signing bonuses. I got one when I was a junior faculty member going into a job. And then partner employment. So some institutions do much better at this than others. But if you have a partner that you're trying to move with you, you can sometimes have conversations about trying to help get that person a job, whether it be on campus and some institutions actually have relationships with industries in their towns where they help folks get jobs. So what I typically tell folks to do is you really need to figure out what are your three or four most important buckets. Because the reality is you're not going to get every single thing that you want. You will not get every single thing that you want. Remember, this is a negotiation. So what your 3 or 4 most important buckets are going to be different from the person sitting next to you if we were all together in a room. It's not the same for every person, and that's okay. Because some people, salary is not important to them. That's not true for most people, but for some people, salary is not that important to them. And what might be really, really important is that their partner has a job, or that they have graduate student support, or that they have enough moving expenses. So you have to sort of pick what are the things that are important to you. And then the relevant, so the importance of each of these sort of changes by each institution, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'll talk about salary, since it's really usually what folks think about first when you think about negotiating. So it's likely never going to be as much as you want it to be. I mean, that's just sort of the reality. And I think often for some of us who have come out of teaching jobs, we're like, wait a second, this isn't that much more than what I would be making if I had just remained a teacher, and now I have a PhD, and this is very frustrating. And yeah, I mean, all those things, I think we all have gone through some of those emotions. So you have to figure out what you are okay with. And I think, like, what do you really want and what are you okay with are two different things. As far as salary goes. And, you know, like I said, some institutions are much more willing to negotiate on this than others, but it is worth your time if an institution is willing to negotiate to push on this a little bit. And it's highly unlikely that if you sort of ask for something that's way above than what the dean would ever give you, they're not going to pull out of negotiations. They're going to say, well, actually, we're more in this ballpark, so let's talk about this ballpark. So I don't think you need to be afraid of, you know, you don't want to be crazy, but, and the other thing, which is really important, is that most public universities have all the salaries publicly available. So I think every person who's hosting this right now, you could probably Google us and figure out how much money we make right now. And that is super, super helpful because it gives you the ballpark, right? If you go on their website, you look at their College of Ed or School of Ed, if that's where you're applying, and you say, okay, what are the assistant professors making this year or last year? And it gives you a place to negotiate. It gives you like some knowledge around how to negotiate. Private institutions do not have their stuff publicly available. But if you have folks inside the institution and you feel comfortable, there are ways to sort of figure out what the ballpark is. Are there any questions, Sarah? Should I just keep going?
No questions yet, so just keep going. Yeah.
Okay.
Emily,
so
one kind of comment question.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to lead into you talking about summer salary right now. But just a forewarning, when you look up people's public salaries, some states and institutions, what's posted is base salary plus summer salary.
Right.
So sometimes you'll look at someone's salary and be like, well, why aren't I being offered that large amount that other assistant professor has? But that what's posted might include their summer salary. So Emily's going to explain right now what a summer salary is if you have no idea what that means. But it's important to keep that in mind when you're looking at publicly posted salaries.
Yeah, and it can get confusing because some don't, right? And so like, and it changes by state actually. If you look at Florida, for example, a lot of their folks get summer salary, but they're only posting the 9 month. So that can get a little bit confusing. So you do have to do a little bit of sort of detective work to kind of figure out what salary you're looking at. So what is summer salary? I know this sometimes is a question that folks have. So typically academics, we are hired into 9 month paid positions. And most institutions allow for us to supplement that 9 months with three more summer months. And so how do you do this? Well, folks who have external research grants, they tend to pay themselves in the summer. Sometimes you can do it through teaching extra courses. Sometimes you have administrative duties that warrant extra pay, and institutions will pay you in the summer. And then you can also get this by negotiating with when you get a job. So for example, I think I did this when I went to UVA. I didn't really need to, but I love to negotiate, so it's kind of a problem for me. But I was like, well, I want 2 summer months for 4 years or something like that. And I negotiated back and forth with the dean on that. And I had kind of like put a clause in there, like if I had got new research funding, then I would just pay myself through my grants. So there are ways to sort of talk about that and sort of negotiate that. And I'll show you a little bit more on that. Startup funds, this is another bucket, are really important for early career faculty. So these funds can be used to start your research agenda, and they can also be used to run pilot studies that will set you up for larger external grants. So this is really important. And I think the way that you negotiate for these funds, so some institutions are going to come to you with a salary and they're going to say, and we're going to give you $20,000 in startup funds or something like that, $10,000, $20,000, whatever it is. You can typically get a little bit more. Sometimes you can get more startup funds, but what I have found to be the most successful on how to do that is actually be like, well, this is the exact study that I want to do, and this is the budget for it, and this is going to lead to an IES submission, an IH submission, to so sort of set them up, because they want to know that their funds are going to something that's going to potentially get them more external funding, especially in a research job. Right, so that's sort of the way you can negotiate for early career funds. So it's important. And if you know folks in the institution, again, or in similar institutions, ask them, how much was your startup? I mean, these are important questions to ask people that you kind of trust. So reasonable teaching rules. So those of you who are thinking about you're going into research institutions, or or ones that are heavy teaching, academia is all about your effort, right? And sort of where you put your time. And we kind of, some of that is forced on us because we have a certain teaching load, but some of that we kind of make choices about where we spend our time, right? So if you're going into a research institution or a teaching institution, but you want to keep up your research, it's really important to ask for a reduced teaching load in the first 3 years of your job. Now, certain places are not going to play that game. They're not going to be like, yeah, we'll do this for 3 years. Some will do it for 1, some will do it for 2, some will do it for 3, some do it for longer. But you should definitely ask. And I'm going to show you how to ask. All this stuff I'll go over in just a little bit more. Okay, so I want to stop here because I kind of went into the things that I think are sort of the most salient or most important for people, but I do want to make sure that folks understand you can ask for moving expenses, and you should ask for moving expenses. So there's other things, but I want to answer any questions about these right now before I go into how to organize yourself.
Emily, sometimes I know that in asking for moving expenses, sometimes depending on how states are set up, they're not allowed to do it. And there are ways to kind of get around that. So right. I didn't know if you wanted to.
So that's, I'm actually glad you asked that, because sometimes there's ways to sort of get like a supplemental bonus on your salary, like a lump sum. If somebody said like, maybe we'll give you $6,000 for moving, but you need to remember that those are taxable dollars. Mm-hmm. So if it's a salary lump sum, that's a taxable thing. And also lump sums are taxed at a higher rate than just normal income. Yeah. So you need to look that up. I mean, it's a federal rate. I forget what it is, but yeah. So like if you're offered $6,000, I mean, really the money to use probably like $2,800. I mean, it's not that much.
Yeah.
So you need to.
And I know some universities will even look at, are there jobs that you might be able to do in the summer leading up to your fall appointment, like developing a course or something to where you're paid a lump sum, but you can also use that to kind of help with maybe moving. And so there are some other ways around that. It just depends on the state, I think, of how they're allowed.
I think that's right. And it depends on the institution as well. Yeah. And then some institutions have an upper limit. Like I think UVA's is $15,000 or something like that for moving expenses. Mm-hmm. Some institutions don't. Like when I moved to University of California, they were like, it wasn't even a question. Like whatever, we'll just pay for, just pack up, get your house, use these movers, pack your house up, and the bill will come to us. So institutions do differ on that.
Emily, one question that has come in from Danica is, are there special things to consider negotiating if it is a 12-month position instead of a 9-month position?
Right. So, right, this is a good question, because I actually, when I went to University of Texas Health Science Center, that was a medical school, so it was a 12-month position. And so what that means is that even when you get grant funds, you can't supplement your income, really. And so if you're going to a 12-month position, I would negotiate for a little bit of a higher base salary, because there is no chance for you to supplement the 9 months, right? Because you're on a 12-month contract. You're at sort of the 100% mark. And then, and then also, I think the other thing is sort of this, I think that's, for me, it's that there's a salary piece there. But most 12-month academic positions are research position. They're more likely to be that than like a teaching load, unless you're going to a job. And this does happen in early career. It's not super common, where you're going to be assistant professor plus some sort of administrative load that would cover sort of that summertime. And I think just if you're going into a position like that, I would really want to see the breakdown of that written out, so that you have an awareness of, if you were to forego the administrative piece in 2 or 3 years, what's your base salary at that point. So all that stuff is really important to get written down and really understand. And that's why I said, like, asking questions is really okay. Universities and people in positions of leadership, they expect you to ask questions. They want clarity too, and they want transparency too. Other questions? Okay. So we have a little time. So I'm gonna go into organizing yourself. This is my favorite part. So I just made this up, but I want to show you what I do. And I do this for all my postdocs and all my graduate students. I also do this for, or I make them do this. I also do this for probably like 10 to 12 people every year who just email me and say, I'm on the job market, need help negotiating. So here you have your buckets, right? So I didn't put all of them on here, but there's salary, there's summer salary, there's teaching load, graduate student support, and moving expenses. So when I negotiated for my job at UVA, I put everything into an Excel file. And I had, I'm just making stuff up here, but I did this in real life too. So I took like the initial offer that I got from UVA, I put it in an Excel file, I put it with the date, I put their offer, and then I wrote them back and I said, well, actually you offered me this thing, but I want this. And I want you to consider these things. So so the initial salary, this is all fake, but if they had offered me $75,000 and I went back at $90,000, that was the ask. Let's say they had offered 1 month of summer salary for 1 year, and I say, no, I want 2 months for 3 years. A 2-1 teaching load for 2 years, because the normal teaching load is 2-2. So if that had been the initial offer, and I could go back and say, well, I want a 1-1 for the first year and a 2-1 for the next 2 years. And so this process sort of goes on and back and forth. And so I think I put it up here because I actually I still have all the documents from when I interviewed at UVA. We actually went through 6 iterations of this. It took a long time. And I think that that's normal. I think that's also normal at this system. When I did this at UC Davis, we went through at least 5 iterations of this, and that was an assistant professor job. So this is really just to to show you that there will be multiple times you're going back and forth, and that's really okay. You shouldn't feel like you're asking for too much or you're taking too much time. Because this is like sort of a normal process, and it's also a really big decision for you and for them, right? So especially if you're going to a tenure track job, most institutions, even if you're going in as an assistant professor, they're hiring you as assistant professor, hoping that you're going to be a tenured professor at that institution, right? Most institutions want that. And so they see this negotiation as a start of a potentially 7, 10, 12-year relationship. So sort of being transparent on both sides is really important and going back and forth. Now you do this respectfully, of course. Like what I would do is I would send an email back being like, thank you for, and I can actually share the wording if folks are interested, but thank you for this, thank you for the information. I have attached an Excel sheet that sort of shows what you offered and what my response is, and like a little bit more explanation in the email. Looking forward to hearing from you, type thing. And some of this stuff happens completely over email and some of it happens on the phone. So for me, the reason why it's important to keep it all in one place is because you might jump on the phone really quickly for 10 minutes with a chair of a department who was like, yeah, so we figured out that we can give you that reduced teaching load. And so then you go to your Excel sheet and you put it in the Excel sheet so that it's all sort of tracked. Whereas some of the other information is on the salary may come in an email from the dean. So it can get sort of complicated. So sort of having everything in one place is helpful. It's helpful to you, and it's your burden because you want everything in writing, right? And so you want to make sure everything's really clear. So eventually we get to the point, and this is actually on the Excel sheet that I did with the dean back and forth at UVA, of like, okay, we agree on this, good, we're done here. This bucket's done, but I still have other things that I want to work on. So the other thing is like, separating these into buckets, I think is really important because like if you come to an agreement on salary, but you're still not in an agreement on graduate student research support or whatever, it's okay to go back on that particular item. So any questions? I think I see questions coming up.
So one question, go ahead, Jess.
I was just going to say the question a few minutes ago was the best way to approach negotiations over email, phone calls.
Yeah, it's going to be both. I mean, that's always been my experience. Some of it happens over email, and this is the nature of people who are busy, right? So like the dean may get like an approval on something from the provost on salary and send you a quick email and be like, oh, we got that salary for you. But that doesn't mean the negotiation's done, right? They may respond and be like, okay, but we're still talking about this, this, and this. Or you might get a quick phone call. So these things, it's going to be both. And that's why I think it's really important to put it on paper. Typically, in my experience, and Jess and Sarah, and Bree, you can tell me that this is different for you, the initial offer typically comes over the phone. That has been my experience. Is that the same for? Okay.
Yeah. Usually
I had it in a letter, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've negotiated a few times, but once on paper, and then the negotiation process is not on paper, and then you finalize it on paper.
Right. So in some institutions, you'll negotiate back and forth like however many times, like this example, but they won't give you a final like real offer until all the terms are decided. And the real offer, I mean like an offer on letterhead with the dean's signature.
Yeah.
So that's pretty normal that they want to iron all this stuff out and then get it into a letter format. Some institutions do it differently, but I've seen that.
And I agree with you, Emily, about the quick phone call. That's one of the things that kind of catches you off guard because the dean might be going to talk to perhaps the provost or something, and then they'll just call you with an update. And I'm not always expecting just calls, right? And so I think like answer your phone if you think it's from somebody, and also be ready for that 5-minute phone call and then be able to make notes very quickly about that phone call.
Right, and get it back. However you're organizing, you don't have to use my idea of the Excel sheet. It's just how I prefer to do it, but like get it somewhere. Yeah. Get it somewhere.
So a question that's come in from Emily is if you get an offer on a phone call, do you negotiate on the spot?
Oh, that's a great question. So what I always tell people what I forgot to say at the beginning was my advisor always told me, you act like you really want a job until you get it. And then you sort of take a step back, you take a deep breath, and because now you're in the mode of sort of, I need to advocate for yourself and negotiate. So you're more likely to sort of get more of the things you need if you sort of take a deep breath and are sort of in the space where I don't actually need this job. When in reality, sometimes you actually do really need this job, right? Because that's sort of the reality of the job market. But I always tell my people to say, thank you so much for this offer. I'm gonna think about it and I will respond to you. Do you prefer that I respond to you on the phone or on email? 99% of the time, if it's a dean, they're going to say, send me an email, because they don't have time for phone calls, usually. And so that I usually don't negotiate on the spot. I tell folks to sort of digest. Now, if you have clarifying questions, like if they give you an offer and they don't say whether it's 9-month or 12-month, of course, ask the questions, but I wouldn't start negotiating back and forth when you get the initial offer. I think you need to stop. You need to write it down. You need to consult the people around you about how to respond.
I think that's exactly right. I wouldn't respond immediately. I would say, thank you. Thank you so much. This is really exciting. I'll get back to you soon for sure. Ho Jong asks, how can we quantify our experience or achievement when we negotiate the salary? For example, maybe you want $20,000 more for 2 years of postdoc experience. So I think that's like, how do you say you want a higher salary based on your prior experience?
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I think that's really important. It's a great question. And that's the only thing, like, you're not going to get everything that you want in salary. So I've never been in an institution where doing a postdoc would get you a higher assistant professor salary, like a significantly higher assistant professor salary. So because you're still an assistant professor who hasn't been through tenure yet. And so what the dean is looking at, or the chair is looking at, is what is the ballpark of my other assistant professors who haven't gone through tenure yet, who are like 1 or 2 years around this person that I'm hiring and sort of in seniority or whatever. That's their ballpark. And you coming in with more experience is not going to motivate them to change, because it becomes an equity situation with their own faculty.
Mm-hmm. And Emily, Mary Rose asks, do you justify why you are asking for more in your certain buckets? So for example, why you're asking for more graduate student support or a lessened teaching load?
Yeah, I usually do. So what I do is I send the sheet, which I try to keep, the Excel sheet, which I try to keep really simple. And then I put some information in the email. Does that make sense? So I'll sort of say, and then I'm asking for a 1-1 because I am going to try and get this research project off the ground in the first 2 years. And I need to be able to establish relationships with schools around. So all that, all that stuff takes time. And so because I think it is important. Like, I don't think you need to go, like, some things like moving is like, I want $12,000 for moving. Like, you don't need to justify, like, I am moving 3,000 miles across the country with 3 small children. That was my purpose. Like, I need more money than $5,000. And so, like, certain things you don't have to go deep into, but like salary, everyone knows why you want more salaries, because you want to make more money. Just, a lot of people want to make more money, but stuff like why you need more research funding, why you need a course release, you can do a small justification or sort of right up there.
Thank you, Emily. And another question from Naima is, when should you officially withdraw from other places if you get an offer?
Okay. Yeah, so I have a little bit on that coming up.
Okay, great.
That's a really good question. So this, look, this is about if you have 2 offers.
Look at this. Yes.
First, yay, that's great. I mean, right now in the crazy job market, it's, if you have two offers, you're in an amazing situation. But so people always ask me, like, what do you do if you have 2 job offers and they're both trying to negotiate at the same time? Well, first of all, this becomes more complex. It absolutely becomes more complex. And you need to organize yourself with both parties, like, separately, right? On a different Excel slide or whatever. But I really like thinking about this. You really do need to be transparent. I think it's totally fine, and you should be telling people that you are negotiating with 2 institutions. I think that that's fine, because it's really likely that you're going to end up working in one of these places, and you want to be transparent with these people. I mean, being transparent is part of being professional, and so sort of going back and forth. And also, it tends to motivate the institutions more to give you the things that you're asking for. Right? Because if they know that you have 2 institutions that are that want you, they're more likely to respond more quickly and more positively to the stuff that you're asking for in your buckets. So the question about when do you withdraw? I wouldn't withdraw from any other job situation, no matter where you are in the process, until you've signed the dotted line with an institution. Because the academic job market is crazy and weird and wild. It's very, very unlikely that like once you start, like it's not common that once you start negotiating that the institution pulls out, but it's not unheard of either. And that's not usually because of the candidate, it's because funding got pulled or something. I mean, I've heard of that happening before. So make sure that you've signed on the dotted line before you tell other institutions that you've already taken a job somewhere else. I don't know if Jess and Sarah and Bree have other advice on that.
I agree. Until you have that absolute signed contract, I would not withdraw from any other search.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Emily, regarding letting the other institution know that you were offered another position?
I think it's fine. I mean, you mean like even before you're in negotiation with two? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, I know that. Yeah, I remember starting negotiations with one. I was interested in it, but I wasn't sold. And right. I let the other, I had already gone on campus, and I let them know. And I said, I just want to let you know I was offered another position. And that if they were interested in me, they needed to try to speed it along, you know.
Right. So I have done that as well. And I think it's totally fine. The other thing is that you probably talked about this, but during an interview, they may ask you, are you interviewing other places? And I think it's totally fine and to your advantage to say yes. If you are, you know, I think that that's totally fine. Okay, what happens if I hate the location? And I really want to talk about this briefly because this is a huge thing in academia. Like there are a lot of great institutions that are not in the best location. We all know that. And so what I tell my folks is you can absolutely live anywhere for 3 years. You can do anything for 3 years. Most people can do anything for 3 years. There may be circumstances in which that doesn't apply to you, and that's okay. But, you know, I never thought I would live in Texas. Sorry, all of you who are in Texas right now.
Which is all of us who are hosting this webinar.
Sorry, I was in Houston, Texas. And I did it for 3 years, and actually I loved it. I had such a good time in Texas. And so, so I think that you can do most things for up to 3 years. And your first job is usually not your last job in academia. We typically move more than other people, especially if you're able to move more than other people. So thinking about it in that way, like this is not a lifetime commitment. You can go somewhere for 3 years, you can establish your career, even 2 years, go somewhere for 2 years, you can establish your career and sort of just see what else is out there later. So I think that's totally normal. It's also normal to be worried about where you're moving because sometimes we have no control over that in the academic job market. Okay. Oops.
And I agree with this point, Emily. Before you go on to your next part, I think right now, especially as the job scene maybe isn't as viable as it always is, I say take the job that gets you to the job that you want. So, you don't want to talk to the university about this, but many jobs are stepping stone jobs. What's the job that can get you, where do you want to be eventually? And what's the job that can set you up for success to get that job? Because as I'm looking at almost all of us who are hosting this webinar, we've changed jobs, right? You don't always stay in the first job that you've taken. And most of my friends I graduated from graduate school have all changed jobs. But you take a job that's a good stepping stone job that's going to get you to that eventual dream job.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Of course, you don't tell the institution that they're your stepping stone.
That's exactly right. You never mentioned that.
Exactly. But it's a great way to think about it. And like, I think most of us can do short-term, less than ideal locations to get that done. So be kind to yourself. This can be very, very stressful. And also negotiating may give you a deeper look into if this institution is the right fit for you. And I think that that's important because sometimes, like, I've been in a situation where none of the places where I've ended up where, negotiating is never really super pleasant, but it can certainly be more pleasant than not. And I tend to be a very transparent person, and I expect that from the people that I'm negotiating with. Like, just tell me what the situation is so we can come to a resolution that makes sense for both of us. And so if so sometimes you have a visit that you leave feeling like, I think Bree, you sort of said, well, this might not be the place for me. And sometimes you leave feeling okay, and then you get into negotiations and it's not exactly, it's just not feeling right. And in those cases, I would really sort of seek the people around you that you trust to sort of be like, am I reacting weird to this? Or is this sort of just a normal part of negotiations? Sort of get that gut check. And like I said, like, sometimes you don't have an option. Like, sometimes this is the option. And so the goal of the negotiation is to sort of get you to a place where you feel good and okay to start your career at that institution. It's not always going to be exactly what you want. And in most cases, it's okay to take some time to think about this. It's a huge decision. Sometimes you will have pressure from the institutions, like, we need an answer by Monday, because if you don't want it, we're moving on to the next candidate. And I would say that absolutely happens. But if they've already invested 3 to 4 weeks negotiating with you, and you say, well, actually, I just need 3 more days, most institutions are going to be okay with that. It's okay to ask for that time.
One of the questions, Emily, that's coming from Amy is, how long do they give you to make a final decision?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could clarify that, you don't have weeks or months. You may have a few days. Maybe you could say, I just need 2 weeks to talk about this with my family. But I would say probably once the last, I would say once the last offer has been provided, you have at least probably the maximum, what would you say, a week to 10 days to let them know.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say it's to your advantage to check in with them. Like, if you get an offer after you've been through all these iterations of going back and forth on all these different the buckets, I call them buckets, and you have an offer letter, you usually have a set amount of time that you have to respond to that. And it's usually a week to 10 days, like Sarah said. But I do think, like, if you're 5 days in and you're like, oh, I just don't know what I'm going to do, email them and be like, can I have 3 more days? Mm-hmm. Most instances, they have already invested so much time in you in the negotiation process. Most of them are going to give you the extra 3 days, because think about it. If you say no, they got to do this all over again with the next person, and they're invested in you at this point. So communicate with people. Just be like, I just need this time. We got to figure out my partner's situation or something like that. And most people understand that, because most folks in academia, as Sarah said, have moved. We get it. Like, it can be stressful, and there's so many different things to consider.
And I would add to that, Emily, that as soon as you get the offer, that evening, you need to start having conversations with your family members, your friends, your mentors. What do you think about this? Would this be a good opportunity for us?
Right.
Don't wait until you've signed or you're about to sign the contract. And some people will say, well, I want to come and I want to visit again, and I now want to look for houses. Well, if that's the case, you better be ready to get on a plane that weekend and go there. You can't say, oh, well, my husband has to get off work in 4 weeks and we can come and visit. No, like, you better be there in 10 days checking this out. And so really think it's go time and you got to go. So be ready to kind of have that as a chaos period, but these decisions do need to be made quickly.
Right. And so seek help, talk to your mentors. But I want to, like, I think when we think mentor, we think of our dissertation advisor. And I want to be really clear that it's possible that person is not your mentor for negotiating a job. And I say this because I had an amazing mentor. He was not my mentor for negotiating a job. You can have multiple mentors in your life, and you should have multiple mentors in your life for different purposes. And if you haven't, like my advisor had been at one institution his entire life and had never moved. So like he hadn't been on the job market in 25 years. And so that's a very different thing than someone who went to the job market last year, or someone who's actively working with folks every single year on the job market, who sort of know the pulse of what the job market is right now and not 25 years ago. So it's okay to seek help from other people. So yes, so I did answer this, but so if you receive 2 offers at the same time, do you negotiate with both? Yes, 100% yes. You had to be organized, 2 different schools, 2 different negotiations, you're negotiating with both at the same time. That was a question. So I'm gonna turn this back over, but also feel free, if there are questions beyond what I was able to get to today, please email me. So I will turn this back over to Reed, I think.
Great. Wonderful. And thank you guys so much for all of your questions. This is fabulous. And I'm sure there are questions that many other people are having as well. So let me make sure I've got this up. We did go ahead and similar to our previous presentations, so webinars, you can see my screen.
Yep.
We did ask junior faculty what they say about negotiating and some of their tips.
One thing I wish I had negotiated for better.
Hey, Bree, if you would go ahead and show the slideshow, then I think we could see the video.
It's not showing. Now do you see it?
No, it hasn't reset yet.
Or salary if you can.
Let me and try it really quickly to share my screen. It says your screen sharing. That is not good. Let me try stop sharing and try it again.
Okay.
Share screen. Let me try it this way. See if that works. Do you see my screen or no?
I do. And now if you could share the presentation as a presentation, I think then the video should play.
Do you see it now?
It's very small. I think I can play this from my screen. Hold on. Let me see here.
That was really strange.
All right, let me go ahead and try it from here.
One thing I wish I had negotiated for better, aside from salary, always try to get more salary if you can, is the amount of startup funds that I got. I ended up using a lot of that for travel and like membership dues, which didn't leave as much left over for research. And so I didn't realize how much I would be using to help me get to conferences those first few years. So if you can go up on startup funds and have more money for travel in addition to research, I'd say that's a good thing to negotiate for.
I think for negotiation, I have a couple of thoughts on this. The first thing I would say is that you want to think about what's most important to you. I have a colleague who really wanted a window in her office when she got her first job out of finishing the doc program, and that was something that was super important to her. But you know, for me, I negotiated startup funds, and then I also negotiated teaching load. So I think teaching load is really important. I am in my second year now as an assistant professor, and I am really glad that I negotiated the teaching load that I did. So I think that is even more important for you to be able to get your footing and just learn about this new role and sort of the culture of the environment that you're in before having, I would say that's more important over having, say, a GRA. Somebody else may have different thoughts on that, but for me, that ended up working out really well. I didn't really have my research projects together or anything ready to have for a GRA to do. So I don't think it would have been very helpful for me, but someone else, may have other thoughts on that. So that's one thing that I would say. And then startup funds was the other thing. And then the second thing I would say about negotiating is that it's really uncomfortable. I think if you are someone like me and you're coming from years in the classroom, that is not something that I ever did as a teacher. So it's kind of an odd space to be in. And I would get advice from a senior faculty member that you trust about how to navigate that conversation, because it is awkward and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but in the end it went just fine. But I think also women tend to be maybe more less comfortable with asking for things that we might want. And so I think that's something that's important to think about. And I would encourage you to just really talk to a lot of people and get advice before you go into the conversation so that you feel prepared.
Something I wish I negotiated a little bit more on was course releases and GA support. So course releases, I love teaching. Teaching's also really intensive. So at OU, we teach a 2-2 load. So I was given a course release within my first 2 years, I could use one, which was helpful, right? Because when I had my course release, I was able to focus a little bit more on research and preparing for some grants. But I wish I had maybe tried to negotiate a second course release, especially if you're moving to a whole new environment. I had to spend a lot of time going out to schools and trying to build connections with basically research sites so we can build partnerships together, and that takes time. And GA support, this is going to be very dependent on where you pursue, where you're applying and how much they offer. But anytime you can have support from GAs, it's going to be helpful for any sort of research. So often I've even heard some people are able to get GA support almost every single year up until tenure, the tenure process. So just don't be scared to ask for more, because the worst they're going to say is no.
All right, we can save the senior faculty one to another time for sure.
Okay. Well, I had a couple more slides, but I don't know if it's going to show. We'll try one more time. Do you see them or no?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's strange. Just a brief recap. We just wanted to thank you all for coming to this series. And if you've missed any of the previous ones, we've mentioned that they are posted on our YouTube site. And we just kind of wanted to just take a moment, really about a minute, to kind of just remind you, seek guidance from your mentors, seek guidance throughout the whole process. That's been a theme that comes up. Talk to other people. Know what you want and need. And that's part of when you're applying. But today it was something that was brought up over again. What do you want and what do you need to be successful as you're negotiating? We talked about being prepared and start early. And that is, kind of a theme that goes across the application materials. Remember, with applying, one size doesn't fit all. And so you want to be creative. You want to stand out. You want to show that you are the best person for this job because your research aligns, because your teaching aligns, because you're interested and you care about that position in particular, not just I need a job. But what is it that university is going to offer you, and what can you offer them? Think about, would I be happy? Oh, here, I need to change that. And think about being prepared and practice. You want to be comfortable when you come in there, and you want to know that you're prepared. And, as today, negotiate. They're expecting you to negotiate, but think again about what are your buckets and filling them in. And finally, enjoy yourself. This can be really stressful, but there's a good possibility that you're going to get an opportunity to meet people. It may not be the university you end up choosing, or they may not choose you, but you're meeting new colleagues that you will probably come in contact with throughout different conferences, through other ways to collaborate. And so remember that this can be a really fun process too. You get to see new places, see new universities, and learn more. It may not be the best place for you, but these may be great faculty or different people that you may end up meeting and forging, great new connections with in the future. So have fun, relax, and enjoy. This can be a great time of your life, and it's stressful, but it can be really fun too. Again, we thank you guys so much for joining us. And this webinar was brought to you through the Division for Research. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. That was fabulous, wonderful information. And if you like our webinars and or would like to make a small donation to DR, we are happy to take it. And that does help us bring programming for you guys, for everyone in the future. And please consider joining DR. It's a great opportunity as you're moving into your next positions to stay connected through CEC when it comes to policy, advocacy, and research, and the role of research to support students with disabilities. So all of these videos are available on our YouTube channel, and stay tuned. We plan to come back in the spring with more webinars, and we would love for you to join us. So we'll be sending out more information through our social media platforms as well as through directly to our membership. So thanks again, and we loved having you.